Catus Maximus here, this time with a review and comparison of precision needle files. Sometimes these are called jeweler's files or electronic files, hobby files, etc. And since I had a few of them, I thought it would be a nice opportunity for a video here. We have both a representation of various different brands. Of course, we have Harbor Freights, both newer ones as well as some older ones. We have some Nicholsons. And we also have some RadioShack needle files. Now, these RadioShacks are quite old. I've had them for quite a while, and they performed way better than I expected until I looked and saw that they were, well, not until, but was pleasantly surprised. These were actually Japanese made, and hence why they've had such good performance. Where like the Harbor Freight ones, particularly the very cheap ones here, that don't even have any kind of handle on them, it's always been kind of hit or miss. Sometimes the heat treatment isn't so great on these, and they seem to wear out super fast, and sometimes they're just fine. They are magnificently cheap, like $3. And I'll include part numbers for all of them except for the old version. Anyway, these 12-piece sets seem to be the modern version, and it has been a progression. This RadioShack set was just a 5-piece set. Then we moved up to 6-piece sets, like in this Nicholson. And then the early Harbor Freight Diamond files were a 10-piece set. And now we've moved up to 12-piece sets. So some things actually are better in the future. There's a wider variety of tools. So, as far as what they're properly called, or what they're calling them, we have round, tapered round, half round, barrette, crossing, knife, equaling, warding, square, and 3-square files. Now, many of those style file names, such as crossing, warding, etc., I'm not particularly familiar with, but those all happen to do with certain filing operations. And there are some people out there who are magical with files. Literally, I've seen people who have, well, maybe not literally seen people, but there are people out there who can have a box of pieces of metal and some files and pretty much fix any car. Another nice aspect, at least of these newer Harbor Freight ones, is they come with more realistic handles versus just being plastidip like some of the old ones. Although most needle files either were plastidip, such as these RadioShacks, or just had no handles at all. So the handles do help a little bit, especially, you know, for giving you a little bit more grip. But what I found is there's many situations where you're have real tight spaces or trying to hold the file real flat, and sometimes it's nice to have the small handles or the uncoated or just straight shank handles. And you can see on these Harbor Freights that they do put on some decent knurling, so that helps you get a good grip. And I mention that because I've run some very cheap ones which didn't have even any knurling, and they do kind of slip around in your hand. Let's take a quick close-up look at these, and I'll pull some out of the package, and we'll take even closer looks to see how good the actual cuts are. Now, this would be the basic needle file set from Harbor Freight, and we have all 12 files. Lots of profiles. Usually what you get in these 12-piece sets, they mention all the different specific names, but you get all these shapes, such as one side is flat and one side is rounded, or one side is flat and the other side is like a pyramid shape. I think that's what they mean by 3-square. There can be little actual square files, round files, elliptical files where the files are rounded on both sides, just straight round files which come to a point. You have flat blade files, and I believe the barrette files are ones where it's like the same shape, but instead of having a flat tip, you have a sharp pointed tip, and you can see that here, where both in the elliptical and in the flat blade files, you have different tip shapes. And I'll have to go back to, I didn't even notice this, but I was looking through this, showing you guys a close-up, and this 3-sided file did not have, let me get a real close zoom of this real fast here. There we go. So it does not have very good cuts on it at all, and they didn't knurl the back side of it. And these, I believe, are supposed to also have cross-hatching on all sides. So interesting. I'll have to see if the other packages are like that, or if this is actually a defective unit. So you want to be kind of careful. That's one of the things when buying these types of products at Harbor Freight. Anyway, let's continue with our close-ups. We have a slightly, I believe these are near the same price, like $3.50. These just have poly handles, so they are just a little bit easier to grip. And these also seem to be just a little bit higher quality with more aggressive cross-hatching on them. You can already see that in the camera as compared to the very basic unit. And so that's why I generally just, you get these basic ones if you're just doing deburring or you're not worried about bending them because they are pretty weak. Otherwise, I would recommend spending a little bit more money and getting a better set. You'll be happier with the results. And then, of course, if you're trying to remove edges from tile or working with glass, carbides, or hardened steels, these diamond files are very handy. They really work well on any kind of real hard, brittle surface. That's what the diamond grit is for. It also happens to leave a pretty good finish. Now, the issues you can run in with diamond grit files, and same with these here, these are a little nicer just because you get a little bit larger filing surface, so they have significantly upgraded them, is that on real cheap ones, and we'll have to see how these perform, they use like a nickel plating and some, I believe, to bond the diamond grit to the file. And if it's really poorly made, then when you're filing with the diamond grit, especially with like glass and ceramics, it can actually scrape the diamond grit and everything off of the file because it isn't bonded very well. But on any decent one, they should hold up pretty well. The diamond does last a fair amount of time, but of course wears out like anything else. But they're just the only way that you can file glass and any kind of hard surfaces. So they are real handy. Also, if you want a bit of a smoother finish, you just don't want to use these with any kind of soft metals like brasses and aluminum, copper, mild steels, because it will just clog them up and they'll become useless. Now, awake files getting clogged up is a common issue, and how you deal with that is that you use a steel or a wire brush and you just brush out the file. If it's getting clogged when you're maybe working with aluminum, then you can file some hard steel and that will kind of help break it apart. So we have a couple of the older sets here. We have the basic Nicholson set, which is a premium quality set. These have worked out real well. And we have the old school RadioShack set. And once again, I'll include all the part numbers for these in the description. These have worked out very well for me. I've always had a good experience with files that are carbon black because it seems that they really hold up well. Kind of like the old Craftsman USA files I reviewed many videos ago. Really just held up well. And the same thing I can say for these. And I've always been careful not to bend them. And I was always curious. I was surprised. But these were actually older, made in Japan files. So no wonder that they've actually held up well. Japanese tools and steels are very high quality. Let's go ahead and take a quick comparison of some of these here. We'll go ahead and take a comparison of both the... What is that? We've got... Some of these do duplicate. Usually in these 12-piece sets, you'll get a couple of flat files. Actually, this is also a 10-piece set. I shouldn't have said that this was 12. These are 10-piece, just like they've been before. Just the steel ones are 12-piece. But on those steel ones, they do come with a couple duplicates, like 2 flat files. So this is going to be the ones that you use most commonly and wear out the quickest. So it's kind of nice that they give you a couple extras. Anyway, and even in these sets, they're giving you a couple duplicates. But we'll go ahead and pull out the square, the round, and the flat of these diamond files and compare the old ones versus the new ones with the flat, square, and round. Oh, they gave you 2 round ones in this. That's kind of interesting. Oh, I guess they do here as well. Let's go ahead and pick all these up and take a nice close look. So here's the old and new Harbor Freight ones. We can see that the older ones are smaller. So you actually get, if we can get this to focus, and a little bit thinner. So the newer Harbor Freight ones actually, as far as appearance, are physically built a little thicker. I'm not sure about the specific quality of the steel. A much higher quality tool steel that's thinner will still be better than a thicker, poor grade steel. But on the face of it, they actually are nicer. I can feel that they're actually quite a bit more rigid. And actually having both of these sets is nice because there may be situations where I need an especially small file. We can see that the diamond grit is actually pretty aggressive on this new one. Definitely feels pretty nice, and we get a little bit of extra surface area, so we get a file that lasts just a little bit longer. Let me zoom in, see if we can really get a... Oh yeah, the zoom on this phone is amazing. So you can see that. And you always like diamond files because, look, you have diamonds now. Come on, focus. There we go. Let's take a look at the round files. And it'll be the same situation. The little older ones are much smaller and finer, while the newer ones are much larger. And I could feel right through here that it feels like there's a thicker coating on the newer ones. So that may be true. You may actually get a longer life, come on, out of these newer, larger ones than you do out of the older ones. But it still is nice to have two different sizes when you need something especially fine. And we can see that the diamond coatings are, you know, pretty nice. You can really see them glittering there. And then to take a look at the square files, actually I pulled out a triangular file here. That's what I did. That is a triangular file, not a square file. They look real similar in the package. And here's the last. There's our tiny little square file from the old one. And then here's the square file from the new one. Let me feel that. Yep, the coatings do feel thicker on these newer, larger ones. So, did want to point that out. Let me zoom back out again. We'll take a comparison of all these steel ones here. Just give me a second to clean this up. Alrighty, let's take a look at all these different steel ones. We'll just take a look at a couple of each of these. We'll look at the traditional flats. And where is our square? We'll look at the flat and the square out of all these sets. There's our square. It's interesting. It seems like it's all different vendors for all these different things or all these different files, because they all have like subtly different packaging. I think that's kind of interesting from Harbor Freight, that even with such a similar product, they still are using different vendors. Here's our Nicholsons. And what you can see here, obviously, is these real cheap, the basic Harbor Freight ones, are basically knockoffs of Nicholsons. Let me put both of these here. Alrighty, and of course our RadioShack ones. Alright, let's take a look at square files with the Japanese RadioShack, Nicholson, Harbor Freight real cheap, and Harbor Freight better quality. Let's go ahead and get our zoom going again here. Hold this in this hand. The zoom on this camera, once again, is just amazing. So what do we have here? These are, the one on the far outside is the Nicholson. Here, let me reorganize this. There we go. So we have a Nicholson, and you can see on the Nicholson it's like perfect, really nice, well-defined cross-hatching, real consistent on all the different sides. You can just see how good that is. The cheap Harbor Freight, you can see, is just much lower quality. This file I've never used, but you can see that the little glint, almost like it has been used, but that's just from the factory. It just doesn't have as high a quality of cross-hatching at all compared to the Nicholsons. And this is a situation where you really get to see what you're paying for when you're buying higher quality ones. Now, the more premium Harbor Freights, the one with those little handles, is night and day compared to the cheap Harbor Freights. We can see that they do have more aggressive, much more defined cross-hatching. There's still a little bit of reflection where it didn't get super deep right on that particular facet. But compared to the cheap Harbor Freights here, they're still pretty nice. But nonetheless, the Nicholson still takes the cake. You can just see how perfect it is. Now, if we take a look at this Japanese RadioShack one, it is finer. It has a very fine surface, but you can feel it's extremely aggressive. And the steel that these RadioShack ones are made out of is extremely hard. These have had very good wear characteristics. I haven't used a square file, but this way you can get a nice little close-up of all the different brands. And we'll do the same thing here and in the same order with the flat files. Now you can see I've used that RadioShack one a bit, and it still works just fine. So the Nicholson, once again, just, you know, near textbook quality cross-hatching. Well, it's not cross, it's just slices, but just real defined. You can just see that in the camera. It looks absolutely perfect. The cheap Harbor Freight, once again, is pretty cheap. Real fine, real shallow. It is actually a crosshatch instead of straight lines, which gives you a little smoother surface, but it is not as aggressive. And so I really like that about the Nicholson. We have the premium grade Harbor Freight, which in this situation is better. You can definitely see that it does have better cross-hatching, but it's not great. And still, once again, it's not a Nicholson, and I shouldn't have chose such a worn RadioShack file. But this one is also pretty good. It's actually a finer than what the Nicholson is, but it's really held up well. And I use this on aluminum. If you're going to really file soft metals, you should really have just a sacrificial file, because you're always having to use it against steel to try to clean out the aluminum. We can see right on the tip how fine the RadioShack one is. Kind of interesting, but the steel is just super hard on those. Anyway, there's just a kind of a close-up and a review and comparison of all these different needle files, just showing you in some instances, such as the Nicholson, what you're really paying for. Oh, and I forgot to show, let me zoom back in one more time here. When you're getting a Nicholson, they have it printed Nicholson right on them. And see, oh, and I didn't notice, these are Swiss made. So Swiss made files, now we can kind of understand why these work out so well. I didn't realize that these were made in Switzerland. And that's the moral of the story. Get some Nicholsons and some real premium grade, and there'll actually be a real difference in the tool that you're getting and how well the little files work. Sometimes there's hidden gems like these RadioShack ones, which may not be quite as good as the Nicholsons, but have worked out just real well. And then you have what's more commonly available, the Pittsburghs and the Harbor Freights. And so, and as we can see, if we can get this out from under there, these with the plastic handles are much better than the basic ones. If you get these basic ones, you'll probably find that they just don't seem to work properly and just toss it up as just being a cheap file, which it is. But there are slightly better ones, and what you get is, you know, more aggressive, deeper, and better cut cross-hatching or hatching on the different files. And so I would generally recommend against these, especially when I had a defect where they didn't even finish manufacturing one of them. So definitely get those, and if you don't like the handles, you can pull them off. And then I always recommend diamond files, just because there's always a time in which you're trying to either work on a real hard piece of steel or something, you know, ceramics and glass, and diamond files are really the only thing that you can use on those kinds of materials. And it's kind of nice to have old and new versions, because now I have a set of super fine diamond files as well as a set of more normal size. These older style super fine ones, it's pretty much universal. So if you look on Amazon and you see packaging like this, you'll probably end up with the real small ones. So if you're looking to have both larger and then super tiny diamond files, that'd be one way to dig them up. Oh, and in response to some of my lock videos and stuff, I had mentioned about Best, but if you also want a padlock that you don't have to worry about somebody picking, basically a lock that would force somebody to use a physical destructive method, cutting or grinding, then you can get these locks from Assa Abloy, these Medicos, and there's no question. There's no question about a lock like that, meaning that if this thing is on it, somebody's going to have to physically destroy it. Picking isn't really an available option. Nothing's unpickable, but Medicos, especially ones that have 6 pins, require God-level skills. Anyway, I wanted to add that as kind of a little response to all those Harbor Freight lock videos. You really need to go to a locksmith or order them. And if you're going to do that, then, you know, spend the money, spend $50 or more, and get one lock that you know is going to really last. And then you just balance the level of security. So something like this is what you put on your U-Haul truck if you're moving across the country, or storage container or something like that. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.